Hi, everyone. It's so great to be here with my friend Viola Alabi, who I haven't seen in ages. So this is a treat, Viola.
It is really a pleasure to be here and great to catch up with you. It's been a while and sucks under these circumstances, but at least we get to see each other's faces. So
we do. We get to see each other's faces, and we also get to see each other's backgrounds. So
yes.
I've been noticing every time somebody turns up from for a live interview at home, I'm analyzing their backgrounds, going, okay, what does this person like to read? What does their home tell us about them? But you've been very neutral here.
So I have to say I don't have the obligatory bookshelves in the background, which I now need to figure out a way to get into my office. I use actually my dining room as an office right now, and so I have paintings everywhere, and this is the one wall that doesn't have a painting, and so that's it. But yeah.
Well, we are waiting for our host, Chidi F Alessi, who is also my business husband and business partner and co-founder in many initiatives over the years since we both left CNN. Chidi, are you able to hear us and take it away? Okay, so at Atlanta, over in Atlanta, the signal seems to be slightly weak. So maybe we can just kick off here, yes. Viola, because I know we have a great audience. There's more than 200 people wanting to get into the real issues when it comes to the creative and cultural industry and entrepreneurs and how we're faring. So let me start by asking you, post-COVID, in the immediate aftermath, how have things been as a creative? What's been the impact for you?
I mean, I think in the sort of real sense, in the immediate sense, it was like, okay, what are we currently doing? What things can we do remotely? What things do we need to rethink? What projects are in the pipeline? And having that conversation with other creatives also around the country to say, what are you doing and how are you managing this time? And so there are different people are in different stages. Some people are actually in between projects, and so they're in post-production. I think people that are in post-production are sort of in a better place because a lot of that work is solitary, and you can do that stuff via remote communication. But it's also still not easy because we're also very touchy and feeling and emotional people, and sometimes we want to be there next to someone and just use your hands to say, can you cut it this way? Can you do this wraparound this way? And so I think that is missing, and we're seeing that. But I think that also too, there are people that had planned to go on set. There are people that have pending contracts. I mean, we have a conversation coming up in a week also, which is going to be about legal, like what are the legal ramifications of not being able to deliver either to your investors, to your sponsors, to so many different stakeholders. So they're also, who are your stakeholders that you also need to be in communication with? We're currently doing a project with the British Council, training and working on a first feature film project with upcoming filmmakers. And that project now has been paused, and we're going to resume in a couple of months, and sort of going back and forth and watching the headlines to see when we can resume. So it's been I think the new state is learning how to live in uncertainty.
Right, exactly. And the brain doesn't like uncertainty. So human beings in general don't do well. If you tell me you'll be locked up in the house for the year, I might freak out and go, okay, but then I would have a plan. So you're quite right about that. One of the things, Viola, I've been thinking and racking my brains with Chidi, and I'm sure you have with the folks around you, is how do African creatives take advantage of the current situation? Is there an opportunity in the uncertainty? Are there spaces that creatives like you and me and others in this room and around the world can actually take advantage of? So how are you seeing that?
So we've also been having that conversation and exploring this. And I think that one of the things that we're finding is opportunities, number one, in when you do have a library, there are opportunities now to exploit that library, either on free platforms or on paid platforms. And so that's a really great opportunity. Also too, we're finding that there's a lot of opportunities around sort of creating new content, but a lot of that content also continues to have sort of the background and sort of these settings that we're not all sort of, that doesn't highlight our creativity, but they are still content indeed. And you're seeing that happening. You're seeing that on different platforms. But I think that this is really a time for us to think about content in a different way and how we integrate content and creativity on different platforms into even short form or long form. So looking at TikTok and how do you integrate TikTok content into broadcast content, into mainstream content? Because people are still creating on TikTok. People are creating on Instagram. Conversations are still happening. Like you said, the brain sort of doesn't like uncertainty, but it also doesn't stop. And so how do we sort of translate some of these different creative pods that we have and bring them together? So there needs to be more collaboration. I think across the continent, we need to sort of consume each other's content more. We need to collaborate more. We need to work together more. And we need to sort of even discover new forms of storytelling. And that doesn't always be in the same room at the same time.
No, it doesn't. In the experiences that I've been having, say for the last few weeks, the other thing that strikes me in terms of opportunity, Biola, is that with the COVID crisis on our continent, there is a communications crisis. How do we get information out to communities across the continent in local language, sometimes where there is not connectivity, which is actually only 23% of Africa has a smartphone and 3 or 4G. And so really getting the social messaging out to the general public is so critical, because we know our health systems can't take it. We know our health systems will decline, and if there's an onslaught of coronavirus, there'll be pain. Chidi, hi. I was in the middle of talking about how to turn an obstacle into an opportunity. And there you be. Perfect timing.
You are.
We were worried about you. We were worried what happened down there in Atlanta.
Yeah, listen. When you're trying to put something like this together, and you look at who your co-pilots or who your partners in crime will be, you want to go with the professionals like Biola and Zane, so that if for some reason I get kidnapped wherever I am, they can handle things. So clearly you did that, right? And so I'm so grateful. So please go on, and let's keep going. This is good. I heard a little bit of that.
I'll just make this point, and then you take over. But we were talking about opportunities, like what could we take, advantages could we take in this space, and I was describing how just creatives are in a position to come with the kind of messaging bring it to the table, to governments, to media, to public health sectors, Pan-African, local, about how to communicate to our audiences on the continent, whether it's musicians or comedians or writers or any kind of a storyteller, because the need is so great right now for prevention. Right? If we prevent coronavirus, the best case scenario is 300,000 people would die on the continent. Best case scenario. Worst case scenario, 3.3 million people. Right? And so I think that creatives and storytellers have a role to play, because African leaders are focusing on prevention, and what we can come up with in moments in time, I think would actually contribute quite significantly to lowering the fatalities. And that I saw as an opportunity, Biola.
Yes, I agree with you. I'm sorry, Chidi, I'm going to make this point as well, and then I'll hand over.
Oh, no, please go ahead. Keep rolling.
I agree with you that communication is actually, and I think that was early on one of the biggest gaps that was recognized. And so once we started to recognize that communication was becoming a problem, we started to we worked with an organization and also worked with the authorities to actually put together some PSA messages. These messages were vetted by our Nigerian Center for Disease Control. And we then sent those messages out to as many celebrities as we can get a hold of. And they did send us back their videos, and we're currently finalizing that. And we did tell them to do it in English and any other language that they're comfortable with. And we're now getting those translated into different languages. But I think that the number one thing is to have a pot where these things are and people can go pull these things. The other thing that I kept on seeing very early on, there was very little stock footage of African children washing their hands, African children in the market washing their hands, just modeling these behaviors that we keep on talking about. And then I remember a couple of weeks later, we saw that Ni Makimalayo had done a animation, and he had made it available to the world, and it actually was picked up in Brazil. So I mean, I think that we are rising to the occasion. I think that what we now need is closer collaboration with government. I think governments do need to tap into the role that the creatives can play. But I think on the other side of that coin, we also need to talk to governments about how to preserve the creative industry, because part of your lifeline and part of what defines you as a culture is this cultural hub. And so what type of relief efforts do we have out there? These are mostly small to medium enterprises. These are independent producers. These are very small businesses and informal. And there is really no nest. There's no security nest for this industry. So I think that, as you know, we need to have two conversations with government, which is one, that we are here to collaborate, to tell the story, to reach out, to get into the grassroots of this story, but also we also need to make sure that we can also have another conversation of how do we preserve this industry? And I think that's the two-sided conversation we need to have. I do want to say that Lagos State has called a small meeting of creatives, and they are working with creatives on certain messaging and trying to get that message out. And I've been part of that meeting. So there is reaching out. I think we need to formalize them. I think this is a great opportunity for us to create a way of working with government, and also how the industry is going to survive during and post-COVID. We lost Chidi again. We made too many points. Yeah.
It was so powerful. He couldn't take it, you know.
But then I want to ask you a question. I mean, I think that, I mean, just when you the numbers you just mentioned, when you look at the way the global news cycle has been going, especially around the story, I mean, the African story. I mean, I saw an image the other day on one of the international news channels that was talking about debt relief, and really talking about debt relief across the continent. And to be honest with you, the images that went along with that were so disturbing, because it was actually, they were showing Kibera, which I thought, if you're going to talk about debt relief, why don't you show our leaders at AU or in a place where we actually are talking about business? You did not need to shoot that. We did not need to see the shot of Kibera. And so I would like to ask you, as sort of someone that's been in the industry and reporting in the past, how do you feel that the global internationals are covering the story of COVID in Africa?
Some are doing it better than others. You come up with the stereotypical stock footage pulled by a associate producer in a newsroom, and you know, many of even the senior producers sometimes lack the sophistication of discerning what story in Africa, what part of Africa, and how the narrative has shifted from, you know, the hunger crisis in Ethiopia to today. But yet the kind of the semiotics and the images are slum babies, flies, poverty, extreme poverty, and that's sort of the easiest image to pull. And the lack of sophistication on how far, in understanding how far Africa as a continent has developed, and the nuance within countries when it comes to business and sort of overcrowded slum areas and urban centers, and so there's not a recognition, in my opinion, on the on how, in general, in newsrooms, on the changes that have happened on the continent over the past couple of decades. However, I have to say that I have seen some good reporting. For example, Financial Times, even the New York Times, have come out with some very interesting, good stories, saying that, you know, this isn't Africa hat in hand when it comes to debt relief, for example. This is not a hat in hand thing. This is, first of all, the foreigner brought the disease here. So that's what the Financial Times had said, number one. Number two, it's because of this external disease that our economies are being decimated, right? And if you don't solve our problem with us now of a debt crisis, and we need this relief and we need additional funds, then we're going to have the virus on this continent, which is only going to reinfect you, which is going to damage the economy and the world. So I think they have, by and large, I think the coverage could be significantly better, Biola. That comes out of ignorance, really. But there are layers of reportage that have demonstrated a little bit of sophistication when it comes to the continent, definitely.
Thank you. I wanted to also ask you, I know you and Chidi have been thinking about the opportunities, and sort of how do you start to rise from this sort of like sudden stop? Like, how do you sort of how do you get your car back running after stopping so suddenly. And I wanted to get a sense of what type of opportunities are you guys seeing when you look at the landscape and you look at the continent, and then also how can we preserve and save our industry?
It's really interesting. Chidi and I had this conversation only yesterday. And the weird thing is, Biola, is that I'm suddenly busier than I have ever been, right? And I'm thinking, why, right? And the opportunities that we've seen is that the groundwork that we've laid over the years as an entrepreneur has manifested itself in the present. And people that know that we were engaged in the creative cultural industry space and the communications, harness local talent and build messages, they recognize that. And while before COVID, and Chidi's here to add to that, would tell us, well, this is such a great idea, but when you're next in Nairobi, Dubai, Kigali, Addis, Johannesburg, let's meet for dinner and we'll make it, and we'll chat, right? And then I was like, oh my gosh, now a flight for the next step, which we did. However, post-COVID, people are at home like we are in front of their laptops taking decisions. So we've noticed the groundwork that we laid is paying off in terms of the relationship building and the decision making. And then also the crisis, and I'd love Chidi to add and sort of enhance what I'm saying. The crisis is so dire and leaders are so worried that they are really looking to creatives to guide them. Right. Yes. And so they're not outreaching and having a Lagos State meeting with you guys. We've got to come for them. I was privy to a call a few days ago where 23 of the top influencers called the Economic Commission for Africa in Addis. And they were just like, this is how we use influencers. This is what we can do. This network, this individual operating successfully in Kibera, actually, how we replicate models. So I think the crisis has offered Chidi and I more opportunities than I was surprised, and Chidi said he wasn't surprised. So he's like, I know, this was but I don't mean to say that that creatives aren't struggling and it's so easy for us. I'm saying that it's been really, really hard, and it still continues to be hard, but the light that's opened up has opened up because there is a need for content in this crisis, and a very strong editorial element around it, and creatives have influence, and creatives have connection in their villages and their towns. And then how do you take it outside of the to the rest of the 70% of the continent that is not connected, and that where the informal sector really drives everything. Chidi, what are your thoughts on how we're doing?
So my apologies. Just the one time that I needed my internet, my 1 gigabyte, $200 a second.
I know.
It didn't work. So anyways, that's you can't control what you can't control. So I think the point that Zane is bringing up is that this is the time when people are starting to really see the value of what creatives can do, right? Because it's not just about the messaging, right? So messaging has been important and is always going to be important. Biola, yourself, and the folks in Lagos, the folks in Kigali, the folks in Nairobi, in Johannesburg, they're all marshaling to make sure that those messages are out there. However, as Zane and I also talk about, and Biola, you know this, folks also need to be entertained. We need to be able to get them away from the daily gloom and doom, because that's all the media is kind of pushing. And so I wanted to push this back to you and talk about that side of the equation, you and Zane, which is, okay, so we know that the messaging around COVID is important, and creatives will help craft that and make sure that it's packaged in the appropriate way. But then let's get into how do we also help people kind of stay even keeled, right? Not to lose their minds. That seems to be falling on creatives. Nigerians and Africans are doing very well on TikTok. I've never seen anything like it, right? Yep. Some of the best GIFs coming out of social media. Is it GIF or GIF? Can we argue about that for 2 seconds?
GIF. I'm going with GIF.
GIF. I say GIF.
Okay.
GIF. Okay. So
you're wrong. This is like how our team talks go.
So anyways, the question is, how what does that mean for us, right? So Biola, what are you cooking up? What are we doing so that our people are not only just going to the internet for COVID information? They need to stay entertained. They need to entertain. Creatives need to create, right? That's what we like to say. Creators create, right?
Yeah.
So, can you talk a little bit about that?
So, I mean, one of the things we've been doing, I mean, sort of before you came on, we actually talked about the opportunities on different platforms, especially with social media, and how much relief is being created on social media and amazing content, and how we might also have to think about how we remotely co-create content. And so we bring different parts of that piece of content together and repurpose it for different platforms. But one of the things that we've seen and we've just been amazed about is just the speed at which creatives are creating. I mean, these memes, I mean, I think we saw Cyril Ramaphosa, the president of South Africa, and his mask, and as quickly as there were all these amazing.
We're doomed.
But really did go out of their way to lift people's spirits up. The amazing comedy. I mean, there's so many amazing comedy skits that are also online that are actually about COVID that actually are getting the message out there. One of the things we're doing is we've just been pitching a show that we want to do that actually does different things. One of them is celebrating the frontliners. The second thing we want to do is actually talk about our heroes, because nobody's going to talk about our heroes if we don't talk about our heroes. And then we also are looking for really interesting and sort of strange love stories. People sort of caught up in the middle of this thing and in different places. And then the last part is what we're saying is that even though people are cooped up, they're still creating, and we're sourcing that creative piece from the different places. And we've been pitching that, and we've been getting an amazing response on the show. And so we're hoping that in the next couple of days, we actually complete the funding for the show and we can greenlight it. But really what we've been doing and what we've just been unearthing is people writing songs about it. And so the show will always end with something about a song, about a stand-up comedy. And we're going to also be asking people to send us different things, and we're going to commission people to make something for us. And those things are going to be things that people make, and hopefully we get this show made. So we're very excited about this, and we've been pitching that, and we've been getting really good responses. The same thing is, like I said earlier, we've been working with Impacted, which is a division of Discovery Channels, to create some PSAs, and we've had some really amazing people send in their message of how to keep people's spirits up, and these are mostly celebrities. So I think at the same time that people are at home, like you said, people never stop creating. And so we're excited about some of the things that are actually going to come out of this and some of the creativity that we're seeing.
If I can ask, sorry, Chidi.
Go ahead. Oh, Zane, please. This is your show.
No. I just wanted to ask Biola, what strange love stories are you coming across?
This is Nollywood. This is Nollywood. It doesn't get stranger than Nollywood.
I can't let that just slide.
Like, so we have a researcher who's just been on. So they're obviously researching most of these stories online and trying to follow up with these leads. And someone did send them a story about a guy who was leaving the house certain times of the day to go exercise, but actually was going to go see his mistress within walking distance. Got caught by the wife. We're following up. The researchers are following up on that lead. We don't know yet. But actually, there are people also, too, that have been stuck. And I mean, one part of a couple is in China. The other one is here. The gentleman in China is trying to make his way back home. There is going to be an evacuation. Nigeria is planning to do an evacuation. And so just that story and following that story, we're really hoping that that couple can share that story. We've also had people whose weddings had to be canceled.
Yeah, that's right.
And what is that? What is the financial ramification of that? Because most of those things have been paid. And so those are some of the stuff we're looking for. But we're looking for more strange stuff. So if people have stuff, please follow me on Twitter.
You know there's strange stuff. There's a lot of
and share those stories with us.
Chidi, on the hope piece that Biola was talking about, we were talking about that the other day, weren't we?
Yeah, I mean, there's opportunities in order to figure out how to coalesce the creative community on the continent to really bring that, like a directed effort towards hope, right? And that's where the last question, because we're actually running out of time. Next time, Ngozi has to give us at least 6 hours.
Last question. We're just getting started.
5 minutes. Yes. I don't know what. But anyways, the question I did want to ask around that was, what does this look like after, right? When we all start to truly move, when we can hop on planes, without I used to wipe my plane seat even before all this stuff. So I'll double wipe it. But now that we'll be moving and we'll be doing all kinds of craziness, moving around, what does this look like going forward? I mean, and this is a very tough question. I know that we're crystal balling, but what does this look like? Because creatives still have to create, and the creative economy still will have to move, whether it's informal or formal. And we've spoken about governments, we've spoken about funders. What does this look like? Is there would there be an effort to at least support this community, this economy, to continue to drive the narrative around Africa?
Yeah. One of the things that's really exciting about this period is I have to say I've been getting pitches almost every day. People pitching me different stories, different films. People are continuing to create. That's one thing that we know. I mean, and people have been having conversations. And just like Zane said, you're a little bit busier than normal because people that normally would have wanted to schedule a face-to-face, now we can schedule a 15, 30-minute introductory.
That's right.
Call. And so there is that that is happening. I do think that as an industry, and I think that one of the things we can look at is look at industries, places that didn't have total lockdown, and look at what lessons we can learn from that. The other day I was looking at new guidelines because we probably are going to be shooting some of these things in this period. So what are the guidelines we need to follow? We sort of need to create new guidelines for the industry. How do we crew up? How do we not crew up? How do we collaborate? What does that look like in the future? What type of security precautions do we take? How do we make sure that people feel safe being on set? People feel safe doing scenes. I think those are all the things that we have to start to put together. We have to have sort of an immediate until there is a vaccine. What sort of are the immediate things that we see? Sort of like what are the midterm, and then what are the long-term benefits of this? But in the midterm, as we start going, as lockdown starts to ease, we do need to create these guidelines. And I've been lucky to find some stuff online that hopefully once we have that together, we'll be able to also share with other people. But I have found some guidelines that they've used in Sweden and in Denmark, and I'm looking at how we can adapt some of them. And it's really about how to work in a different way to make sure that everyone is safe. And so, some of the creatives also have to take that in mind. Instead of us having big market scenes, we're going to have to make sure those scenes are different and they're shot differently and they're smaller. But I think that, as we said, we're going to continue to create. But I see this as a huge opportunity for us on the continent. Number one, to figure out new ways of protecting the creative industry, acknowledging the fact that the creative industry on the continent is creating multiple jobs, the fact that entertainment will continue to be a demand. I mean, if you go on Netflix today, Netflix, I know in Nigeria anyway, my interface is full of Nigerian films that are in the top 10. And once again, this is over the last couple of days. I mean, a film released 2 days ago and it's now #1. That is Love is War. So if you haven't seen it, I haven't seen it. Yeah. It's called Love is War. It stars Amani Oboli and RMD. These are some of the biggest stars in Nigeria. Last week we had the setup on, and once again, these films are #1. So I do believe that entertainment will continue to be a driver for the industry. And so for me, I feel like the future is bright. We just have to get through this tough time.
Yeah.
Zane, I have a good question for you. I actually have a good question for you, so you can take it and run with it, right? So think about this, right? You did one of the most incredible, and I don't say this because I work with you. I say it because I owe you money, so I don't want to. But right?
Oh yeah.
You forgot. You said in your TED talk that the most important person in Africa is the storyteller, right? And I want you to close us out by helping us by bringing that into the context of what's happening today and how important the storyteller is in Africa's ability to kind of move post-COVID, whatever this new normal that everybody keeps talking about, that I've been looking it up on Google and nobody can show me what it is. But can you give us context, using that particular statement that you made as that of your statement?
Thanks, Chidi. Yes, we've always believed that it's the storyteller that is the most important person in Africa, because it's the storyteller that defines the values of our time. It's the storyteller that tells the stories from the perspectives that we have, the diversity that we understand. It's the storyteller that exports our culture. It's the storyteller that exports our soft power, not only to the world, but across the continent and to each other. So the storyteller can explain what is happening on the continent to the world and to one another. It's the storyteller, as Biola is describing, that is coming up with the creatives, the ideas and the concepts now more than ever. And there is a pool where jobs can be created. The storyteller can rebuild and be part of the recovery process of the continent and create new jobs. As Africa braces, the world may be tapering down, but the continent is bracing for a potential hard hit, and I hope I'm wrong. But there's a lot of fear about this. It's the storyteller that can look at creative ways to bring entertainment into the home, to look at harnessing technologies, virtual realities, e-learning, distributed teams, and find new ways to work with each other and tell our stories that continue to become engaged, and perhaps show the world how we can not only come up with creative stuff, but come up with ideas and stories and tell them through stories that can be replicated around the world, like what Mologic is doing in Senegal. You know, $1 rapid coronavirus kit, right? Like that's a story. We are innovating all the time. So so it's the storyteller that has the transformative capability for the continent today, during this crisis, and beyond.
Okay.
Was that okay, Chidi? Since you helped craft that with me.
and that was great. You know, and again, actually, let's keep talking until they come in and drag us out. Yeah. So Biola, what do you think about that? I mean, what's your thought on that particular statement?
No. I totally think that is storytellers are the most important piece of the puzzle on the continent. And I think that for so many years, we lost our voice and we haven't been telling our story. And what's so beautiful about these amazing platforms with social media is that our stories are everywhere now. And so people are hearing our own side of the story, our own voice. And also too, I mean, if you're on Twitter, just the conversations happening around Africa. One of the things that happened as soon as this happened, I was pulled into a group of 20 people across the continent called Africa Unusual. And we've just started working on policy and looking at what governments can do. And we've done 2 different documents now on what governments need to do, how African governments. So I think that that's the beautiful thing about technology, is that it's actually been an enabler for storytellers and for Africans to take our stories back. Our stories have been hijacked by the world for so many years, and now we get to own our own narrative. And I think that's what we're seeing. And that's why you're hearing people commend so many of our leaders on how they're handling this.
Yeah. Okay. Well, listen, this has been wonderful.
Employed. We got to keep them employed. We got to make sure that we create opportunity, and our governments need to engage on how we keep the creative industry going, because the creative industry is a huge contributor to so much of our economy, but also to reducing unemployment, especially youth unemployment. And that is one thing that we have to make sure doesn't stop. We have to be able to continue to provide opportunities for young people across the continent, and we need a plan and a solution for that.
Wow. You know what? We should get on WhatsApp and continue the conversation just between the 3 of us and figure out how to do this. That's right. You know, listen.
This platform, or this is just we speak only.
So you know, I've been kind of multitasking. I'm on WhatsApp with the Social Media Week Lagos people, and so we've run out of time essentially. So it's all good. I think that maybe we find another way to make this happen, or Ngozi can help us do something more on this, because this is a very important topic.
And I just want to say amazing and congratulations to them for making this happen. Yeah,
absolutely. And this is can I say this? This is the creatives, right? These are the creatives. This is Ngozi and her team are at the core of what we're discussing. And so, see, now she comes in, right? When we weren't talking about her, she was, but now she wants to come in. Now that we're giving her juice.
This is a great session. I've been listening, and the comments, people have been commenting. So this was great. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
What have been the general themes of people's comments, if I may ask, just very briefly, like so we understand what people have engaged with.
A little bit, like people were wondering. Let's see. Like one person was acting like what, like the storyteller and like what are they saying, like in terms of like transformation, like how can the storyteller like transform like what they're doing now, like what is the role of storytelling in this moment. And then people just saying, I guess off of some of the stories that Viola was sharing about the project she's working on, they were saying good dramatic storytelling, and just everything you were saying sounded very appropriate. And just as people kind of also sharing what they do, and just like a lot of people putting in like, oh, I'm a film director, like this is helpful. So people were kind of sharing like where they fit in the creative sector.
So
and Ngozi, so it would be helpful going forward if there are filmmakers and storytellers in this pool that and the community that we have here. That if we hear of projects or I have ideas or Viola, like we could, maybe we can find them, right?
Yeah,
and that's the spirit.
Yeah.
Is that what you were going to say, Viola?
So we created a database via Airtable. So we've been dropping it in here and just telling everybody to drop their info there, and then we'll share it. So we're asking them like, what do you do? What are you passionate about? And then kind of asking them how they'd like to be further involved. So that can be a way to like kind of connect, keep on connecting, sharing the information.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you all for your time. Okay. Oh, no, he's not there. Okay.
Lots of wahala.
Yeah.
Wow.
And he really prepared, huh? And he
I know,
hasn't got any screen time here. We just rocked up. He's like,
I know,
yes,
y'all
my
hopped right into it. So.
But it's good. It's good. It's good. I'm so glad. It's so good to see you, Zane. So good to see you, Ngozi.
You too, Viola.
Yes, thank you, ladies.
Thank you for having us.
I appreciate you all. Thank you. Have a good rest of your days. Bye.
Bye.